Beneath the crowns, palaces, and centuries of stiff ceremony lies a royal truth far stranger than fiction. From teddy bear obsessions to banned board games, from secret tunnels to toothpaste rituals, the British royal family isn't just historic, it's hilariously bizarre. You've heard the myths. Now meet the monarchy's most ridiculous realities. These are the facts too weird for history books, and too real to make up. Welcome to 53 Ridiculous Facts About the British Royal Family, where tradition meets absurdity, and nothing is quite as dignified as it seems. Before we dive headfirst into corgis, coronations, and completely unnecessary shoelace ironing, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into royal ridiculousness. And while you're here, drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Midnight in Manchester? Sunrise in Sydney? We want to know who's joining us on this wonderfully weird journey through the Crown's strangest secrets. 1. The monarch doesn't need a driving license. There are rules, and then there are royal exceptions. You, for instance, cannot legally drive without a license. Not unless you'd like to explain yourself to a judge. But if you're the British monarch? Well, rules are more like suggestions written in pencil. Since driving licenses in the UK are issued in the name of the monarch, the sovereign doesn't need one. Nor, for that matter, do they require a registration plate on their car. This makes the royal motorcade less of a vehicle convoy and more of a sovereign flex on wheels, a floating paradox in motion. Picture the Queen behind the wheel of a green Jaguar, no license, no number plate, just quietly humming along the winding roads of Balmoral. It's not just symbolic. Elizabeth II actually drove, during her military service in Wadufurtu and well into her 90s. No, not chauffeured. Drove, sometimes without bodyguards. A woman with corgis in the back seat and absolute legal immunity at the wheel. The only thing more British than that would be a scone served with passive aggression. This technical immunity also means the monarch can't be legally prosecuted or compelled to testify in court. It's not that they're above the law. It's that, legally speaking, they are the law. You might call that divine right 2.0. God save the Queen, but also, good luck arguing with her in traffic. And just when you think this is as absurdly VIP as it gets, we come to our next fact, which makes skipping the DMV seem quaint in comparison. The monarch doesn't need a passport either. 2. They don't need a passport either. If you're planning international travel, you'll need to jump through the usual bureaucratic hoops. But for the British monarch? No such nonsense. They can travel across borders without ever flashing a passport. Why? Because British passports are issued in the name of the sovereign. So it would be redundant. It's not just that they don't need a passport. They are the passport. Every single British travel document begins with, Her Britannic Majesty's Secretary of State requests and requires in the name of Her Majesty, which would be quite the power move if you said it aloud at Heathrow. This rule only applies to the monarch. Other royals still have to bring their documents like the rest of us mortals. Prince Charles has used a passport. Prince William uses a passport. But Queen Elizabeth? She floated through immigration like a diplomatic specter. Imagine the customs officer at JFK. Do you have anything to declare, ma'am? And she just stares, not rudely, just imperially, and glides past, immune to stamps and scanners alike. It's the ultimate travel hack. Be born the incarnation of your nation's legal identity. And if you think that's excessive, wait till you hear about her shoes. No, really. Even those were handled for her in an unusually specific way. And if you're enjoying the royal absurdity so far, from passport-free travel to shoes broken in by staff, now's the perfect time to subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more where that came from. While you're at it, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Are you up late doom-scrolling in Dublin or tuning in over tea in Toronto? Let's see how far this royal rabbit hole reaches. 3. Queen Elizabeth had her shoes broken in by staff. You may have heard of breaking in shoes, but in royal circles, even that basic human discomfort was outsourced. Queen Elizabeth II did not personally suffer the indignity of stiff new leather. Instead, someone else, a royal staff member presumably selected for their foot similarity, would wear in Her Majesty's shoes before she ever slipped into them. It's not laziness. It's logistics. When you're on your feet greeting foreign dignitaries, inspecting troops, opening hospitals, and smiling through 6 hours of pageantry, you can't afford a blister. Your footwear must be pre-defeated. According to palace sources, the chosen shoebreaker was expected to have the same shoe size as the Queen. Their job? Walk around indoors in the monarch's new shoes until they were adequately softened. Somewhere between a butler and a podiatrist. An honor, surely. A little weird? Also, yes. But it reveals something deeper. Royal life is not luxury exactly. It's performance art with centuries of ritual, repetition, and discomfort management. Even the shoes are stage props. And the stagehand who breaks them in does so not just for comfort, but to maintain an illusion that the Queen never sweats, never blisters, never falters. And if you're wondering whether this level of micromanaged dignity extends to food, well, it does. Just don't offer them garlic shrimp. We'll explain why. 4. No shellfish or garlic on royal menus, on duty. Royalty may seem like the epitome of indulgence. Gilded palaces, sparkling tiaras, 4-foot-high hats worn indoors like that's completely normal. But when it comes to food, things get oddly restrictive, especially when they're on duty, which, for a royal, is about 87% of their waking hours. Shellfish and garlic are generally banned from official royal menus. Not because of personal preferences or mysterious allergies, but because of very public risks. Shellfish can cause food poisoning, and garlic, well, garlic causes something arguably worse in a diplomatic context: bad breath. Let that sink in. You're the Queen of England, Supreme Governor of the Church of England, Defender of the Faith. And you're not allowed to eat scampi. Not because you don't like it, but because someone, somewhere, once threw up at a banquet, and now no royal is ever allowed to taste a crab cake again on the record. And garlic? It's not just avoided, it's effectively excommunicated from Buckingham kitchens during state visits. The goal is to keep conversations minty and non-lethal. Imagine having to shake hands with 400 foreign dignitaries while exuding the fragrant aura of tzatziki. Protocol won't have it. Former palace chefs have confirmed this quiet culinary censorship. When preparing meals for public engagements, the no garlic rule is absolute. It's not written in any ancient scrolls, just a practical measure to avoid any risk of a pungent faux pas. One royal chef even said that if you dared to sneak in garlic, you'd never hear the end of it. But when they're off duty, all bets are off. Charles reportedly loves a cheesy baked egg with mushrooms. William's into roast chicken. The Queen? She was known to sneak in a little smoked salmon here and there. Still, for the most part, royals live in a world where food is filtered through an invisible lens of diplomacy, digestive safety, and dental hygiene. They're not eating for hunger. They're eating for the brand. And the brand, apparently, prefers its monarch served with mint sprigs and plausible deniability. Of course, some things are too sacred for rules, like birthdays. Except even that gets weird, because royal birthdays don't happen once, they happen twice. 5. Kings and queens have 2 birthdays. You may only get 1 birthday a year, and if you're lucky, a few social media stories and a cake shaped like something vaguely resembling your personality. But the British monarch? They get 2 birthdays. Because when you're royalty, even time has to bend a little. There's the actual boring biological birth date. For example, Queen Elizabeth II was born on April 21, 1926. And then there's the official birthday, celebrated with all the royal flair: horse parades, balcony waves, 41-gun salutes, flyovers, the works. usually sometime in June, because apparently good weather is more important than factual accuracy. This tradition started with King George II in 1748. His birthday was in November, and he didn't think it was festive enough. So he moved it. And thus was born the concept of the official birthday, a second, sunnier occasion better suited for public celebration, and presumably fewer umbrellas. The main event is Trooping the Color, a military parade with such extravagant ceremony that it makes even Buckingham Palace look like it's trying too hard. Every year, it marks the monarch's official birthday, even if it's months off the mark. Elizabeth, for instance, celebrated hers on a June Saturday, despite being an Aries. This isn't a quirk. It's a branding strategy. You can't throw a national holiday around someone's birthday if it happens to fall in the middle of storm season. So the monarchy just declared their own weather-optimized timeline. Efficient, if not exactly honest. And here's the kicker. The actual birthday is often spent quietly. Maybe with close family, maybe walking the dogs, maybe inspecting one's unlicensed, plateless car. Meanwhile, the official birthday is all flags and formation flying, because nothing says national unity like pretending the head of state was born on a more convenient day. And speaking of pretending, there's one thing royals never pretend to do. They don't sign autographs, ever, for a surprisingly serious reason. 6. Royals aren't supposed to sign autographs. Autographs are part of the celebrity deal, right? You see someone famous, a pop star, an actor, a guy who once won a baking competition, and you ask them to sign something. It's the ritual exchange of modern fame. Their name, your napkin, both now slightly more valuable. But if you meet a British royal and ask them to sign something, prepare to be politely declined, maybe even regally declined. Because members of the royal family are expressly discouraged, almost forbidden, from signing autographs. Not because they're being snobby, but because of forgery. Yes, really. The logic goes like this. If a royal signs something and it falls into the wrong hands, someone could trace the signature and use it for fraud. So rather than risk it, they simply don't sign. At all. That includes photographs, programs, body parts, and especially anything that smells like eBay. Queen Elizabeth II? Never signed an autograph. Charles? Same. William and Harry have occasionally made exceptions in very controlled circumstances, like charity events. But even then, it's rare. Meghan Markle signed one or two when she was still a working royal, but the press had a field day with it. The palace does not play. What they will do is pose for a carefully staged photo, offer a firm handshake, or possibly write you a very formal thank you note. But spontaneous scribbles? That's a no. Even during royal walkabouts, the smiling, waving, glad-handing marathons that pass for public engagement, you'll never see them whip out a pen. Some say it's another example of royals being weirdly detached. Others argue it's a practical security measure in a world where deepfakes and fake IDs are real threats. Either way, it's a reminder. Even the most mundane things, like writing your name, can become dangerous when you represent an entire nation. And if you think that's a little stiff, just wait until you find out what their last name actually is. 7. Royal surname, Mountbatten Windsor, but rarely used. You probably know your last name. It's on your passport, your driver's license, your dental records. You likely use it daily, or at least when filling out awkward online forms. But ask a royal their last name and you might get a blank stare, or an impromptu history lesson that spans several dynasties, wars, and name changes. Technically, the surname of the British royal family is Mountbatten Windsor, a mouthful born from a compromise between Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. Before that, it was just Windsor, a name adopted in 1917 to sound less German during World War I. Because, fun fact, the royal family used to be the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which sounded a little too Kaiser-ish for wartime Britain. Philip, meanwhile, was born a prince of Greece and Denmark with the surname Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glucksburg. Try fitting that on a Starbucks cup. When he married Elizabeth, he anglicized his name to Mountbatten, his maternal family's name. But when it came time to name their descendants, they needed something that acknowledged both sides. Hence, Mountbatten Windsor. Yet here's the twist. Most royals don't use it. At all. Instead of a last name, they use their titles. William and Harry were known as William Wales and Harry Wales, while in school and military service, based on their father's title, Prince of Wales. George, Charlotte, and Louis are going by Wales now, since William inherited the title. The name Mountbatten Windsor typically only shows up on legal documents, marriage certificates, lawsuits, yes, they happen, and the occasional scandal. It's a surname that exists in theory more than practice. Kind of like their ability to veto parliamentary laws. Technically there, but no one wants to test it. And while the name may be rarely used, family traditions are not. Which brings us to a lesser-known, slightly bizarre one. How royals celebrate Christmas. Spoiler alert, it involves cheap gifts. Very cheap. 8. Cheap or tacky gifts among themselves. You might think that the royal family, with access to crown jewels, priceless antiques, and entire estates full of gilded things, would exchange luxury gifts every Christmas. Fabergé eggs, Cartier watches, a Monet or two. But no, in fact the exact opposite is true. Among themselves, the royals reportedly engage in a time-honored tradition of giving each other the most ridiculous, tacky, and cheap gifts they can find. The goal is not grandeur, it's comedy. It's Christmas meets Who Bought This at Poundland. One year, Princess Anne supposedly gave her brother Charles a white leather toilet seat. He liked it so much he took it on overseas tours. Meghan Markle is rumored to have impressed the Queen early on by giving her a singing hamster toy. The Queen reportedly laughed so hard, her corgis attacked it. This all happens at Sandringham, the royal estate in Norfolk, where the family gathers for a deeply structured Christmas schedule involving church, outfit changes, and very punctual meals. But before any of that, the gag gift exchange happens on Christmas Eve, a nod to their German heritage. The gifts are laid out in the red drawing room, each present tagged with a name, waiting to be opened with mock solemnity and actual delight. The tackier, the better. It's one of the rare times the royal family behaves like an ordinary, slightly chaotic family. Think less Downton Abbey, more the office holiday party. Of course, this tradition is strictly for the inner circle. Publicly, the royal gift game is far more serious, full of diplomatic tokens and elaborate exchanges. But behind palace doors, it's toilet humor and novelty mugs. And speaking of odd things done behind closed doors, the next royal tradition takes us all the way back to Henry VIII, a man who was deeply suspicious, deeply powerful, and apparently deeply fixated on bedsheets. 9. Henry VIII. Maid staff kiss his bedding. If there was a rule book for historical royal paranoia, Henry VIII probably wrote it, in between marriages, annulments, and the occasional constitutional crisis. The man didn't trust easily, and when it came to his own bed, he didn't take chances. Legend has it, Henry VIII demanded that his servants kiss his bedclothes before he lay down each night. Why? To check for poison. Because naturally, if the linens were laced with toxins, the unlucky kisser would collapse, and Henry could rest easy, knowing the danger had been outsourced. Now, whether this ritual actually worked as intended is debatable. But the optics? Flawlessly medieval. Picture a line of servants pressing their lips to a king's pillowcase like it's a religious relic. No, not out of affection, but because their job description apparently included bed taster. Paranoia wasn't unusual for monarchs of the time. Poison was a real threat. Assassination plots were not uncommon, and Henry, with his court full of intrigue, betrayal, and ambitious nobles, had every reason to fear the pillow. Still, this particular method raises more questions than it answers. Did the servant kiss every corner? How thoroughly? Was there a designated bed linen kisser in the royal org chart? No one knows. But the story has endured, possibly because it feels so perfectly Henry, dramatic, excessive, and mildly terrifying. And while modern monarchs no longer require their staff to kiss the duvet, they do still receive some very strange gifts. Rifles, mangoes, live animals. We'll get to that in a moment. But first you should know, this whole royal gift registry is very real, very official, and very weird. 10. Royal gift lists. Get bizarre items. You might think gift-giving to the British royal family is a delicate art, something between a state ceremony and a hostage negotiation. And you'd be right. There's protocol, there are rules, and yes, there's an official log. Because when you're royalty, even the weirdest stuff has to be itemized and recorded for posterity. The royal household keeps meticulous records of every gift received, and the inventory reads less like a dignified list of diplomatic offerings and more like the aftermath of a very unpredictable Secret Santa party. To name just a few, 12 boxes of mangoes, an automatic rifle, a doctoral thesis, a snowboard, and, arguably the best of all, 2 live sloths from Brazil. That's not a metaphor. Sloths. With claws. Breathing. And presumably unimpressed by their new zip code. These gifts are often presented during official visits, where local customs blend with royal formality. Sometimes gifts are deeply symbolic. Other times they're a diplomatic shrug wrapped in bubble wrap. Yet regardless of intention, they all go into the official royal gift log, which is published annually like a very strange yearbook. There are rules about what happens next. If a gift is worth less than £150, the royal recipient can keep it. If it's worth more, and they want to keep it, they must reimburse the treasury. Yes, even the Queen had to technically pay for a gift if it exceeded protocol. Which makes you wonder, did she ever pull out her wallet for those mangoes? Animals, when given, are typically rehomed to zoos or wildlife facilities. You can't exactly keep a sloth in Kensington Palace, after all, though it's tempting to imagine it lounging on a velvet cushion next to a corgi. This ritual of bizarre, sometimes borderline unmanageable gifting shows us something deeper. The monarchy isn't just about tradition and titles. It's also a moving target for the world's strange goodwill. And no one embodies that odd intersection of royal protocol and personal oddity better than Prince Andrew, especially when it comes to his deeply unsettling attachment to stuffed animals. 11. Prince Andrew's teddy bear obsession. Let's talk about teddy bears. Most people leave them behind somewhere between losing baby teeth and learning algebra. But for Prince Andrew, Duke of York, teddy bears were apparently a full-blown lifestyle. According to a former palace maid, Prince Andrew owned a personal collection of about 72 stuffed animals. And not just owned them. He required them to be arranged in precise order on his bed every single day. That's not an exaggeration. Staff were reportedly trained, step by step, in how to position each bear, the size, the angle, the facial expression. Okay, maybe not the last one, but it wouldn't be surprising. There was even an official photograph used as a diagram to ensure no plush companion was misplaced. Get it wrong, and you'd be expected to start over. No word on whether they needed to salute the bears before tucking them in, but you get the picture. This wasn't a childhood quirk carried into adulthood. It was full-grown royal decorum, applied to beanie babies. And not in secret either. This was staff knowledge, operational protocol, part of the housekeeping brief. What makes this so peculiar, even by royal standards, is not the collection itself, but the obsessive control. Imagine having the power and resources of a royal duke, and choosing to exercise it over the symmetrical alignment of 70-plus plush toys. Not palace security. Not diplomacy. Teddy bears. Of course, Andrew's eccentricities don't stop there, but the royal family has long excelled at containing their oddities within walls of silent tradition. The bears stayed fluffed, the protocol stayed rigid, and the staff, Well, the staff presumably started applying for transfers. Now, eccentricity is one thing, but when it veers into actual logistics planning, you start asking different questions, like who packs the bags? What gets brought along on royal tours? Jewelry? Staff? Sloths? Nope. Try this. Queen Elizabeth reportedly traveled with her own supply of blood. 12. Queen carried her own supply of blood. Traveling can be unpredictable. You forget a toothbrush, miss a connection, get seated next to a screaming toddler. But if you're Queen Elizabeth II, you don't just bring earplugs. You bring your own blood. Yes, really. When the Queen traveled to remote locations or countries where local medical care might not be up to royal standards, she reportedly packed a supply of her own blood, just in case of an emergency. Along with it, a Royal Navy doctor and a full medical team accompanied her. You know, the usual travel buddies. This wasn't a melodramatic flourish. It was cold, calculated logistics. Royals are national assets. If something were to happen to the Queen abroad, there'd be more than just personal loss. It could spark constitutional chaos. So everything, right down to the IV bag, had to be accounted for. It's not entirely unique to her. Other heads of state, including U.S. presidents, have had similar arrangements. But it still paints a surreal picture. Among the crown jewels, silk gowns, and official regalia, a quiet, refrigerated pack of royal blood humming in a medical cooler. You imagine the customs form. Anything to declare? Just my monarchy-grade plasma. In some ways it's fitting. Queen Elizabeth was famously stoic, prepared, and unflinchingly responsible. The kind of person who wouldn't just hope for the best. She'd pack the worst-case scenario, label it clearly, and double-check the seal. It also underscores the sheer absurdity of royal logistics. There are no casual moments. Every move, every meal, every microbe is pre-vetted, cross-referenced, and approved by an invisible army of planners. Even biology isn't left to chance. And if you're thinking this sounds over the top, wait until you hear what woke her up every morning. Alarm clocks are for commoners. The Queen had bagpipes. 13. The Queen's alarm. Bagpipes. Most people wake up to an alarm clock. Maybe it's your phone. Maybe it's the dulcet tones of a local FM station. Maybe it's the shrill, existential scream of reality. But if you were Queen Elizabeth II, at least when residing at one of her official homes, you were woken up by a lone piper. Yes, bagpipes, outside your window. Every single morning. 15 minutes of traditional Scottish piping, right there under the royal windows at 9 a.m. sharp, rain or shine. The Queen didn't just tolerate this, she insisted on it. It wasn't an occasional novelty. It was institutionalized. The piper to the sovereign is an actual role in the royal household, a full-time job with the very specific task of being the Queen's live musical snooze button. This tradition dates back to Queen Victoria, who, like many royals, had a soft spot for Scotland. Elizabeth carried it on throughout her reign. At Buckingham Palace, Holyrood House in Edinburgh, and Balmoral Castle, her beloved summer retreat in the Highlands. Wherever she went, the pipes followed. Now, bagpipes are not known for their subtlety. They don't gently coax you from slumber. They declare morning like a battle cry. It's not time to rise. It's the day has begun, and you are not ready for it, which is, arguably, the most monarchic way to be woken up. But it wasn't just ceremony for ceremony's sake. The Queen reportedly loved the sound. It reminded her of Scotland, a place where she felt most at ease. A royal, yes, but also a woman in tweed, walking dogs, and watching the hills roll on forever. And for the piper, it was a career highlight, unless, of course, you hit the wrong note. Imagine playing bagpipes outside a monarch's window and knowing that one sour tone could be the difference between tradition and early retirement. And if you think waking up to bagpipes is strange, wait till you hear what Charles talks to over breakfast. Not his staff, not even his horses, his plants. 14. Prince Charles talks to his plants. For decades, People rolled their eyes at the idea of Prince Charles, now King Charles III, talking to his plants. It was the kind of fact that showed up in late-night monologues and tabloid punchlines. The heir to the throne, leaning in close to a fern, whispering sweet nothings. Naturally, it became a meme before memes existed. But here's the twist. It's true. And Charles never denied it. In fact, he doubled down. In a 1986 interview, Charles explained that he spoke to his plants and even gave them gentle encouragement, not out of madness, but as a form of connection with nature. "I just come and talk to the plants, really. Very important to talk to them. They respond, I find," he said casually, like he was discussing the weather. To many, it sounded eccentric. To others, endearingly weird. But for Charles, it was rooted in a deep commitment to environmentalism. Long before it became fashionable, he championed organic farming, biodiversity, and sustainability. Talking to plants wasn't about believing they'd reply. It was about respecting life, however small or leafy. And science eventually caught up. Studies began to suggest that vibrations, even from sound, could affect plant growth. Not proof that begonias crave compliments, but enough to make Charles look less like a loony prince and more like a prophetic gardener. Over time, this quirky habit became one of those royal oddities that everyone accepts. Like the Queen's handbags being used to send secret signals, or Princess Anne's refusal to smile in photographs. It's weird, but it's royal weird, which is different. And now that Charles is king, you have to wonder, is he still out there early in the morning, talking to his hedgerow, advising the tomatoes on compost etiquette, telling the roses they're doing splendidly? Probably. And somewhere in the distance, a bagpipe plays. But if you think plant whispering is strange royal behavior, just wait until you hear about what happens at Christmas, where guests are weighed before and after dinner. And no, this isn't a joke. 15. Weighing guests at Sandringham. There are holiday traditions, and then there are royal holiday traditions, which often exist somewhere between ancient ritual and straight-up sitcom plotline. One of the most talked about of these? The Sandringham Weigh-In. Reportedly, guests invited to Christmas at the Royal Sandringham estate are weighed both when they arrive and when they leave. Not covertly, not with a sly look at your waistline, on an actual antique scale, in front of everyone. The goal? To ensure that each guest has been well fed and taken care of. At least, that's the explanation. It supposedly dates back to King Edward VII, who wanted to make sure his guests left heavier, a sign they'd had a jolly good time and eaten their fill. Imagine walking into a grand estate, handing over your coat, and being immediately ushered onto a scale like you're a Victorian sideshow. Welcome to the royal household. Kindly place your dignity in that corner. The weigh-in is said to be light-hearted, not enforced with any real scrutiny. But still, it's enough to make you think twice about that third helping of Christmas pudding. Or possibly go for 4, just to be polite. Guests who've spoken about the tradition usually mention it with a kind of bemused affection. It's ridiculous, yes, but that's half the point. The royal family runs on continuity, pageantry, and quirks. Lots and lots of quirks. And if you're wondering whether this tradition still happens, well, no one's officially confirmed it, but no one's denied it either, which in royal terms is basically a confession. The real mystery, though, isn't the scale. It's the fact that the royals keep doing things because they've always done them, like speaking to plants, or avoiding shellfish, or, as you're about to find out, updating the bees when the monarch dies. Yes, the bees. 16. Royal bees must be told. The monarch has died. When a monarch dies, there's a formal announcement, a solemn procession, military salutes, and black banners unfurled across palace gates. But in Britain's stranger corners of tradition, there's also one lesser-known, deeply peculiar ritual. Someone has to go and inform the bees. Yes, the bees. This custom is centuries old and rarely spoken of, but it persists quietly. a thread from the past still buzzing gently in the present. When Queen Elizabeth II passed in 2022, it was reported that the royal beekeeper, John Chappell, followed protocol. He traveled to Buckingham Palace and Clarence House, where royal hives are kept, and delivered the message to the colonies that their mistress had died. The act is more than ceremonial, it's almost spiritual. The hives are tied with black ribbon. The beekeeper gently knocks on the hive and speaks to the bees, informing them that their sovereign is gone and asking them to remain in service to the new monarch. It's a mix of folklore, superstition, and agrarian empathy, rooted in the old belief that bees are connected to the soul of the household. If the bees are not told, legend says, they may stop producing honey, leave the hive, or even die. It's not just bad manners, it's bad luck. No one really believes bees understand monarchy. That's not the point. The ritual isn't for them, it's for us. A way to link life, death, and continuity with nature. It's a nod to the unseen threads that tie the human world to everything else buzzing just beneath it. And in a monarchy obsessed with tradition, it makes perfect sense. Telling the bees is just one more way to stitch the past to the present, to maintain an invisible order beneath all the velvet and titles. And speaking of rules that sound made up but aren't, there's one game the royal family is reportedly banned from playing altogether. Not because of superstition or tradition, but because things once got a little too competitive. 17. The royals banned from playing Monopoly. You'd think a board game about property, taxes, and crushing your opponents through real estate speculation would be ideal for a royal family. But according to several reports, Monopoly has been quietly and unofficially banned from royal gatherings, because apparently it gets too intense. The origin of this bizarre ban traces back to Prince Andrew, of all people, who once told a group of people during a public engagement that Monopoly was prohibited in the family because it gets too vicious. No further context was given, which of course made things worse. The idea of a royal shouting across the table over a hotel on Mayfair has lived rent-free in public imagination ever since. The royals, like most families, probably enjoy a little board game now and then, but Monopoly, with its long playtime, high-stakes investment, and casual capitalism, seems to bring out the worst. Allegedly. Whether it's strategic cruelty or just the unbearable length of the game, no one's quite sure, but the story stuck. Now it's become lore. Monopoly is the one game you don't bring to Sandringham. Not even the collector's edition. Not even the coronation commemorative version. And honestly, it makes sense. The game is built on greed, hoarding, and crushing your enemies with a smile. Which, come to think of it, does feel a little too on the nose for a family whose wealth is literally measured in crown estates and castles. Maybe the ban is symbolic. Maybe it's an inside joke that got out of hand. Or maybe, and this is very possible, someone flipped the board one year, and it was never spoken of again. Either way, the message is clear. In royal circles, diplomacy is key, and Monopoly is a threat to the Christmas truce. Fortunately, when things got too dramatic, there was always a royal pet around to lighten the mood, especially if it had short legs, a long back, and royal blood. And that, dear listener, is how Queen Elizabeth ended up accidentally inventing her own dog breed. 18. Queen Elizabeth invented a dog breed, the Dorgie of all the titles Queen Elizabeth II held: monarch, supreme governor of the church, commander-in-chief. Accidental dog breeder might be the most charming, because thanks to a bit of unsupervised canine mingling, the Queen is credited with the creation of a brand new dog breed, the Dorgie. A Dorgie is exactly what it sounds like, a cross between a dachshund and a corgi. And it came about when one of the Queen's beloved Pembroke Welsh corgis got a little too friendly with Princess Margaret's dachshund Pipkin. The result? Short-legged, long-bodied, bat-eared bundles of royal chaos. Rather than be horrified, the Queen was reportedly delighted. She embraced the new breed and even helped popularize it in royal circles. Dorgus began appearing alongside the corgis in palace photos, trotting along the grounds of Windsor and Balmoral like they'd always been part of the royal dog lineup. Over the years, the Queen reportedly had several Dorgas, with charmingly British names like Vulcan and Candy. They had the sass of a dachshund, the attitude of a corgi, and the full run of the palace. One can imagine them barking at priceless tapestries or chasing diplomats down marbled corridors. And in typical royal fashion, the Dorgas weren't just pets. They were extended family. The Queen was deeply attached to her dogs, feeding them herself, walking them daily, and even designing special menus with the royal chef. Yes, the dogs had their own menu. The Dorgas, like the corgis before them, became symbols of the Queen's eccentricity, her warmth, and her refusal to be entirely consumed by the machinery of monarchy. Where the crown was stiff, the Dorgas were floppy. Where protocol demanded distance, the Dorgas demanded belly rubs. And in a family defined by legacy, it's oddly poetic that the Queen's most lasting genetic contribution to the modern age might not be through her descendants, but through a squishy, wiggly, four-legged hybrid with royal pedigree and a stubborn streak. Of course, the Queen's contributions weren't limited to dog breeds. She also played her part in something a bit more serious, like, say, helping win a world war. 19. Elizabeth was a mechanic in Wowifu. Before she was the sovereign, she was a second subaltern. That's not a fancy royal title. It was her official rank in the Auxiliary Territorial Service during the Second World War. Yes, Queen Elizabeth II, the woman known for silk gloves and diamond tiaras, once wore grease-stained overalls and worked under the hood of military vehicles. In 1945, at just 18 years old, Princess Elizabeth insisted on joining the war effort, not as a figurehead, but in uniform. Her father, King George VI, reportedly wasn't thrilled about the idea. After all, princesses weren't supposed to get their hands dirty. But she persisted, and eventually she became the first female member of the royal family to serve in the armed forces. During her time with the ATS, she trained as a mechanic and military truck driver. She learned to change tires, rebuild engines, and drive ambulances. Her training included stripping down and reassembling engines, and she became fluent in the inner workings of vehicles like the Austin K2-Y ambulance and the Bedford truck. Not exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd one day wave from a golden carriage. The image of the young princess in uniform, sleeves rolled up, covered in engine oil, became an iconic wartime morale booster. To the public, it was a powerful symbol. The future queen was not sitting safely in a palace, but rolling up her sleeves alongside the people. Even later in life, she reportedly retained a fondness for cars and driving. She remained the only person in Britain legally allowed to drive without a license, a privilege she exercised well into her 90s, occasionally surprising security staff by hopping behind the wheel herself. It's a reminder that beneath all the pageantry, Elizabeth II had a deeply pragmatic streak. She understood symbolism, and she knew how to subvert it. What better way to connect with a war-weary nation than to become a grease-smeared princess who could fix a flat tire? Of course, not all her public gestures were quite so mechanical. Some were far more visual, and surprisingly strategic. Like, for instance, her famously vivid fashion choices. 20. Bright clothes for visibility. You never had to wonder where Queen Elizabeth II was in a crowd. All you had to do was look for the nearest bolt of fuchsia, lemon yellow, electric blue, or radioactive lime. Her clothing choices weren't just fashion statements, they were strategic visibility tools. According to her longtime personal assistant, the Queen intentionally wore bright, even borderline fluorescent outfits so people could easily spot her in public. "I have to be seen to be believed," she once said. A perfect distillation of monarchy in the 21st century. These weren't random color choices. Every outfit was meticulously coordinated for maximum effect. Hats matched coats, which matched gloves, which often matched umbrellas, complete with colored trim, of course. When she visited a hospital, she wore soothing pastels. When she visited construction sites, She wore high-contrast tones. And when she attended diplomatic events, jewel tones, rich silks, and brooches that spoke in silent semaphore. Behind every color was a team of advisors and dressers. But the driving philosophy was always the same: stand out. In a world of flashing cameras, towering guards, and massive crowds, the monarch had to be visually accessible, not hidden in beige or drowned in navy. Her clothing also became a language. A neon green ensemble at the Trooping the Color parade once sparked online speculation that she was trolling us. The internet quickly turned her into a green screen meme. A brooch worn during a meeting with President Trump was widely interpreted as a quiet diplomatic gesture, one that referenced her meeting with the Obamas. Coincidence? Maybe. But in royal fashion, nothing is just clothing. This strategic sartorial flair made her instantly recognizable. A living symbol, dressed like a Pantone swatch with constitutional authority. And it's no exaggeration to say her outfits often outshone the events themselves. Yet beneath all the color and pageantry, the Queen never forgot her wartime roots or her religious traditions, some of which are older and stranger than anything on the runway. Like this one. Monarchs once shared their beds with saints. 21. Monarchs share beds with saints. No, that's not a poetic metaphor. In medieval times, some British monarchs quite literally slept with saints, or at least with bits of them. Relics, bones, shrouds, pieces of the sacred dead tucked under royal pillows or nestled between silken sheets. Because why wouldn't you want a little divine protection while you sleep in a drafty castle that doubles as a political war zone? The tradition wasn't unique to Britain, but the royals took it seriously. Kings and queens believed that sleeping beside a saint's relic would ward off illness, shield them from enemies, and bring them closer to God, or at the very least, give them a better night's rest. These relics were seen as conduits of holy power, tangible links to the divine. Some monarchs kept entire reliquaries beside their beds. Others went further, placing sacred bones directly on or in the bed, sometimes even stitched into the mattress lining. There are records of kings sleeping with relics of St. Edward the Confessor, St. Thomas Becket, and even pieces of the True Cross. It's less of a bedtime routine and more of a spiritual insurance policy. And while it might sound odd today, consider the context. Medicine was unreliable, political betrayal was common, and the average life expectancy was alarmingly low. If a bone fragment from a martyred saint gave you even a psychological edge over your enemies, you took it. Of course, the optics were a little dramatic. Picture a medieval king slipping into bed beside a jawbone and murmuring a prayer before sleep. But in a world where divine right and mortal danger coexisted under the same roof, superstition and statecraft often overlapped. This wasn't about comfort. It was about control over life, death, and destiny. And when you're holding on to power by a thread of divine justification, you'd better sleep surrounded by miracles. Naturally, the next step from relic sharing would be relic testing, specifically using your own mouth to test for poison. Yes, monarchs really did that too, and not just once, repeatedly. 22. Kissing linen to test for poison. If your bedtime routine involves brushing your teeth and maybe scrolling through your phone, count yourself lucky. For certain monarchs, sleep came only after a far more paranoid ritual, kissing their bed linens to test for poison. Yes, you read that right. In a world of assassinations, backstabbing courtiers, and questionable wine tasters, the royal bedsheets were not to be trusted. The logic was grimly straightforward. If the linens were laced with poison, some kind of toxic powder or substance, it might be absorbed through the lips or skin. So, as a precaution, monarchs would lightly kiss or touch parts of the bedding before settling in for the night. A sort of regal litmus test, with their own lips as the instrument. You have to imagine how stressful this kind of bedtime must have been. No memory foam, no lavender mist, just a nagging concern that your pillowcase might be trying to kill you. To make matters more surreal, this wasn't a one-off oddity. In several courts, not just in Britain, royal bedding was treated with extreme suspicion. Servants were required to change sheets daily, inspect mattresses, and sometimes even sleep in the monarch's bed before the monarch did. The logic: if anyone was going to drop dead, better it be the footman. It paints a vivid picture of how fragile power really was, especially in eras where medicine was guesswork and betrayal was practically a hobby. Sleep, that most basic human need, became a minefield of invisible threats, and kissing your own blanket became a necessary absurdity. These rituals didn't just reflect paranoia, they institutionalized it. A monarchy built on image and survival had to extend its vigilance to every corner, including the folds of a bedsheet. Now, speaking of royal meals and mystery substances, the next item on our list takes strange dining to a new level: the alleged royal appetite for frog pies, and not the metaphorical kind. 23. Strange royal food habits. Live frog pies. Among the more questionable entries in the annals of royal dining is a tale that sounds like it came straight from a medieval fever dream. Frog pie. Specifically, live frog pie. Yes, according to anecdotal reports from the more eccentric fringes of food history, certain monarchs or aristocrats may have indulged in this bizarre dish as a form of culinary entertainment. Now let's slow down. Were monarchs really consuming pies full of croaking amphibians? Probably not regularly. And maybe not at all in the literal sense. Many historians suggest these accounts are exaggerated or symbolic, designed to illustrate the decadence and theatricality of royal feasts rather than record actual menu items. But that doesn't make the story any less strange. The tale goes something like this. A pie crust, seemingly ordinary, is presented at a banquet. It is cut open, and rather than steam or filling, a horde of live frogs leap out across the table. Gasps, laughter, possibly screams, and probably a few ruined goblets of wine. Was it dinner, or just a prank masquerading as dessert? That's unclear, but such stories speak volumes about how royal banquets once served not just as meals, but as entertainment. These weren't quiet dinners. They were theatrical performances, and sometimes surrealist ones at that. Even if the frogs weren't eaten, the implication was clear. The royal court had the power, and audacity, to turn even a humble pie into a spectacle. It was food as status, cuisine as control, a reminder that when you're wealthy enough, you don't just eat to live, you eat to be remembered. And while the menu has since become a bit more sensible, some royal choices still reflect deeply personal concerns. Take, for instance, Queen Elizabeth's decision to stop breeding her beloved corgis. A surprisingly emotional and quietly powerful move. 24. Queen Elizabeth's last, pure corgi died. For decades, Queen Elizabeth II was almost as famous for her corgis as for her crown. The stubby-legged, fox-faced Pembroke Welsh corgis became her signature companions, trotting beside her through palace halls, trailing behind her cars, and occasionally nipping at the heels of unsuspecting footmen. But in 2018, that long-standing royal canine dynasty quietly came to an end. Willow, her last purebred corgi, passed away that year. It wasn't just the death of a pet. It marked the closing of a personal era. Willow was the 14th generation descended from Susan, the corgi gifted to Elizabeth on her 18th birthday in 1944. That's right. The Queen's corgi line had a longer and more meticulously maintained family tree than most aristocrats. What made the story even more poignant was the Queen's decision not to breed any more corgis after Willow. She reportedly didn't want to leave any behind when she died. A rare display of vulnerability from someone trained for a lifetime in emotional reserve. In many ways, this choice was uncharacteristically personal. The Queen wasn't just thinking like a monarch. She was thinking like someone who knew time was finite. It was a quietly dignified act of closure and a break from royal continuity that spoke volumes. Of course, she still had dogs, including Dorgus, the Dachshund Corgi hybrids created by accident decades earlier. But the pure Corgi line, that distinct royal tradition, ended with Willow. In a family built on legacy, lineage, and continuity, ending a bloodline is a statement, one not of failure, but of self-awareness. It suggested that not everything royal must go on forever. Some things, even beloved traditions, are allowed to stop. 25. In Scotland, she was Elizabeth I. When Elizabeth II ascended the throne in 1952, she became Queen of the United Kingdom. That includes England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and of course Scotland. But there was one small problem. Scotland never had an Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, famously ruled England from 1558 to 1603. But during that time, Scotland had its own monarch, Mary, Queen of Scots, followed by her son, James VI. So when Elizabeth II came to power and added the "II" to her name, some Scots weren't exactly thrilled. In fact, there were protests and vandalism. Some postboxes bearing the royal cipher EIIR, Elizabeth II, Regina, were defaced or blown up in protest of what was seen as an imposed English history. You see, in the strange logic of monarchy, where tradition matters more than mathematics, numbering is determined based on the higher of the English or Scottish precedent. Since England had an Elizabeth I and Scotland did not. Technically, she should have been Elizabeth I of Scotland, but the government decided otherwise, and the royal title remained unified. Elizabeth II, across all the lands. This detail might sound nitpicky, but it reveals how fragile and symbolic monarchy really is. Names are more than labels. They are history in shorthand. And to call her Elizabeth II in a land that never had an Elizabeth I felt to many like historical erasure, or at the very least, English dominance wrapped in a coronation robe. The monarchy eventually adapted. In Scotland, newer royal postboxes omit the numeral altogether, using only the Crown of Scotland and the royal arms. It's a quiet, unspoken compromise, a small concession to regional identity that avoids digging up too many thistles. And speaking of monarchy meeting modernity, the next fact marks a royal first that was anything but symbolic. It was beamed to millions of screens in real time. 26. Queen Elizabeth's coronation was the first televised monarch coronation. On June 2, 1953, Britain did something it had never done before. It invited the public into Westminster Abbey, not physically, but through the glowing screens of black and white televisions. Queen Elizabeth II's coronation was the first to be televised, and it marked the beginning of a new era where monarchy met media. This wasn't an obvious decision at the time. In fact, many senior advisors and politicians were against it. Prime Minister Winston Churchill reportedly believed it would cheapen the sacred nature of the event. Others feared the presence of cameras in such a hallowed space would be disruptive or irreverent. But Elizabeth overruled them. She understood even then the power of visibility. If the crown was to remain relevant in the 20th century, it had to be seen, not just heard about. And so, 27 million people in the UK alone tuned in to watch. Many households bought a TV specifically for the occasion. Streets were packed with neighbors crowding around a single screen. It was a stunning success. The golden coach, the ornate regalia, the solemn oaths, the Archbishop of Canterbury placing St. Edward's crown upon her head, all of it became a shared national moment. It wasn't just pageantry, it was television history. And it wasn't a one-off. Elizabeth continued to embrace broadcast throughout her reign. She gave the first televised Christmas address in 1957, turning a formal royal message into an annual tradition watched by millions. These broadcasts allowed her to maintain the image of stability while adapting to a world that increasingly demanded transparency. By opening the doors to the cameras, she redefined what a modern monarchy could look like. It became both more accessible and more performative, a balancing act of authenticity and spectacle. But while TV brought the monarchy closer to the people, some traditions remained defiantly old world. like the one where the crown claims ownership of a certain species of bird. And not just metaphorically. 27. Swan-upping tradition. Once a year, in the slow heat of July, men in red and white uniforms row up the River Thames calling out, "All up!" They're not pirates. They're not parade performers. They're royal swan counters. And they're participating in one of Britain's oldest and most oddly named traditions, swan-upping. Yes, this is a real thing. Swan-upping is the annual census of mute swans along a specific stretch of the Thames. The tradition dates back to the 12th century when the Crown claimed ownership of all unmarked swans in open water. Back then, swans were prized as luxury food, reserved for feasts and royal banquets. Today, thankfully, it's more about conservation than cuisine. The modern ceremony involves the Queen's, now King's, swan marker and crews from two ancient guilds, the Worshipful Company of Vintners and the Worshipful Company of Dyers. They patrol the river in traditional skiffs, gently capturing swan families, checking their health, tagging the cygnets, and recording their numbers. If you think this sounds like something out of a Monty Python sketch, you're not alone. But it's all very official. The swan marker wears a ceremonial blazer. The event follows a strict route, and press photographers are always nearby, capturing the surreal image of grown men in 18th century garb chasing swans with nets. For the royals, swan-upping is more than a quirky tradition. It's an annual reaffirmation of historical rights and responsibilities, a visible reminder that monarchy is not just about crowns and courts, but also about riverbanks, wildlife, and ancient customs that most people forgot even existed. And while the swans are counted, weighed, and gently released, one can't help but feel the underlying message. Nothing in Britain is too odd, too old, or too feathery to still matter. But if the Thames holds secrets in its swan-speckled waters, then the land beneath Buckingham Palace might hold even more, because rumor has it there's something hiding underneath the monarchy, literally. 28. Secret tunnels under Buckingham Palace. Beneath the gilded chandeliers, ceremonial guards, and endless rooms of Buckingham Palace lies something far less talked about. Tunnels. Allegedly a secret network of them. Some are documented. Others are rumored. And then there are those that exist in the shadowy space between confirmed fact and royal folklore. These tunnels reportedly connect Buckingham Palace to other key locations in London, including Clarence House, the Houses of Parliament, and even 10 Downing Street. Whether that's architectural truth or a blend of urban legend and palace whispers depends on who you ask. And how far down you're willing to go. The idea of underground passageways isn't far-fetched. Many historical buildings in London are connected by such routes, built for safety, discretion, or convenience. In the case of Buckingham Palace, such tunnels would make practical sense during wartime or moments of national crisis, allowing safe passage for royals without public exposure. But practicality aside, the secrecy is what keeps people curious. Over the years, occasional reports have surfaced, from staff, curious journalists, or odd first-hand tales. One recurring claim involves a tunnel that emerges discreetly at a local pub near the palace. Another, more mysterious, involves a forgotten access point discovered during renovations. And then there's the alleged incident involving a man found living in one of the unused underground sections. But more on him later. What makes these tunnels fascinating isn't just their existence. It's the symbolism. The monarchy thrives on duality. Public splendor above ground, private maneuvering beneath, and nothing captures that tension better than a palace with secret escape routes. So while tourists snap selfies outside the front gates somewhere below, a quiet network may still exist, hidden from view, just like the inner workings of the royal machine. Speaking of hidden networks, not everything below the surface stayed quiet, because during World War II, the palace itself wasn't just a symbol of national pride. It was a target. 29. Buckingham Palace survived. 9 bombs in World War II. In the early 1940s, the world was unraveling, and London was under siege. The Blitz rained fire from the skies, leaving homes, hospitals, and historical landmarks reduced to rubble. And right in the middle of it all stood Buckingham Palace, very much not spared. Over the course of the war, the palace was struck by bombs at least 9 times. The most serious hit came in 1940, when German planes dropped a bomb that destroyed the royal chapel. Other blasts shattered windows, collapsed ceilings, and pockmarked the palace grounds. One even detonated just yards from where King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, were standing. But rather than retreat to Windsor or some country estate, the King and Queen stayed put. Their presence in central London, enduring the same dangers as their subjects, became a powerful symbol of resilience. When asked why she wouldn't leave, the Queen Mother famously said, "The children will not go without me. I won't leave the King, and the King will never leave." It was as much a PR moment as a patriotic one. But it worked. Morale rose. The monarchy became more than ceremonial. It became relevant. Of course, the palace was prepared, to a degree. Blackout curtains were installed. Guards were increased. Emergency procedures were drilled. But no amount of preparation could make it truly safe. The palace remained a very visible target, both strategically and symbolically. After the war, repairs were made quietly, efficiently, without much fuss. The royal family didn't turn it into a personal tragedy. They kept it stiff upper-lipped, because survival, not sentiment, was the message. But amid all the bombings, the royal family was also quietly pioneering something very new, something that would redefine their connection to the people forever. They were going digital. 30. The Queen's first email in 1976. First tweet in 2014. Before most households had color televisions, Queen Elizabeth II had already sent an email. It was 1976, and computers still looked like oversized microwaves. But the Queen, in a white lab coat, visited the Royal Signals and Radar establishment and sent her first electronic message using ARPANET, the early Internet. The message was reportedly signed Elizabeth R. and sent using a computer terminal the size of a dining table. She wasn't emailing family or booking a flight to Balmoral. It was symbolic, a gesture of royal curiosity about the future. But even as a symbol, it was shockingly ahead of its time. Fast forward nearly 4 decades, and in 2014, she tweeted for the first time, during the opening of a science exhibition at the Science Museum. The tweet read, "It is a pleasure to open the Information Age exhibition today at the Science Museum, and I hope people will enjoy visiting. Elizabeth R." No emojis, just pure sovereign formality. This wasn't a one-off stunt. It marked the beginning of a carefully curated royal presence on social media. The monarchy had arrived in the digital age. Cautiously, yes, but not begrudgingly. Royal websites launched. YouTube channels were created. Instagram accounts started showcasing behind-the-scenes moments that would have once remained hidden within palace walls. For a monarchy steeped in centuries of tradition, this pivot was radical. The Queen wasn't trying to become a content creator, but she was acknowledging the shift in how people connect with institutions. If monarchy is part theater, then the audience had moved online. There was something uncanny about seeing centuries-old tradition transmitted via pixel and hashtag. It proved that even one of the world's most ancient institutions could learn to swipe, post, and refresh. But don't worry. For all their digital upgrades, the royals never gave up their old habits. In fact, their daily routines remained just as peculiar as ever. Case in point, the Queen's curious drinking habits, which involved gin before lunch and champagne before bed. 31. Queen Elizabeth's unusual drink habits. Queen Elizabeth II was famously disciplined, endlessly dutiful, and impeccably composed, but when it came to her daily routine, she also knew how to enjoy the finer things in life. One such indulgence? A surprisingly structured and slightly eyebrow-raising series of drinks spread throughout her day. According to former royal chefs and insiders, the Queen reportedly enjoyed 4 alcoholic beverages per day, depending on the schedule. It began with a pre-lunch cocktail, typically a gin and dubonnet, served over ice with a slice of lemon. Not your average mid-morning pick-me-up, but then again, this wasn't your average 95-year-old woman managing a constitutional monarchy. Lunch might include a glass of wine, then, in the evening, a dry martini, a favorite inherited by her son Charles, now king, and finally, before bed, a flute of champagne to round out the day. Now, before we imagine Her Majesty doing tequila shots in the gardens of Windsor, let's be clear, these weren't heavy pours. Everything was measured, modest, and very much part of a controlled, consistent rhythm. The Queen wasn't drinking to escape her problems. She was drinking, quite frankly, because it was Tuesday. In 2021, reports surfaced that her doctors advised cutting back, not due to any scandal, but simply as a health precaution. The palace didn't confirm or deny it, of course, because nothing says royal tradition like dignified silence. What's interesting isn't the alcohol itself, it's the precision. Each drink served at its time in the correct glass prepared to royal standards. Even leisure in the Queen's world was a matter of protocol. And while most of us might forget to floss some days, Elizabeth had a lifestyle where even the smallest rituals, like a drink or a nap, were baked into national myth. But if you think that's specific, wait until you learn about some of the tiniest tasks royal staff were responsible for. From ironing shoelaces to pre-pasting toothbrushes, welcome to the microscopic world of royal luxury. 32. Royal perks: shoelaces ironed, toothpaste placed on toothbrush. When you think about royal perks, you might imagine grand estates, golden carriages, or private jets. But some of the strangest luxuries afforded to the royal family exist not on a large scale, but in the smallest, most obsessively managed details. Like ironed shoelaces. Yes, according to former palace insiders, staff were responsible for removing royal shoelaces, ironing them to perfection, and then relacing the shoes before they were worn. Creased laces? Unthinkable. The shoes had to look pristine from every angle, even if no one ever got close enough to notice. Then there's the toothpaste ritual. In at least one royal household, reportedly Charles but possibly more widespread, a servant was tasked with squeezing exactly the right amount of toothpaste onto a royal toothbrush at the right time. Precision matters. One blob applied daily. Not too much. Not too little. Goldilocks dentistry. These details might sound ridiculous, and frankly they are, but they speak to a deeper reality of royal life. It's a performance. Every detail, every motion, every outfit and action is part of a carefully choreographed display of control. You're not just brushing your teeth. You're brushing the teeth of a living symbol of national continuity. Other reported micro-tasks include pre-warming the toilet seat, laying out pajamas in a precise fold, and organizing teddy bears in an exact arrangement, but we've already covered that particular saga. It's not about laziness. It's about ritual. Royals aren't supposed to spend time fiddling with shoelaces or toothpaste tubes. Their job is to remain composed, unflustered, and symbolically pristine. Delegating the mundane becomes essential, so the grand illusion never cracks. And sometimes, when the illusion did crack, things got awkward. Like in 1890, when the future Edward VII found himself embroiled in a full-blown gambling scandal over a game of baccarat. Yes, baccarat. 33. The Royal Baccarat Scandal of 1890. If you thought modern royal scandals were dramatic, let's rewind to a time when a playing card could unravel the dignity of a future king. The year was 1890, and the Prince of Wales, the man who would later become King Edward VII, found himself at the center of a headline-grabbing scandal involving nothing more than a game of baccarat. The incident occurred at Tranby Croft, a lavish country estate, where the prince was visiting friends. Among the guests was a man named Sir William Gordon Cumming, a respected officer in the Scots Guards. One evening, the group gathered for a friendly game of baccarat, a popular gambling pastime at the time, albeit one technically illegal under British law. During the game, Gordon Cumming was accused of cheating. Several guests claimed to have seen him manipulating his bets and cards, albeit discreetly. The stakes weren't just financial, they were social. This was the Prince of Wales's inner circle. And suddenly, one of their own was being quietly blackballed. Rather than take the matter public, the guests confronted Gordon Cumming privately. He vehemently denied cheating but was pressured into signing a document swearing never to play cards again, in exchange for the matter being dropped. Unfortunately, it didn't end there. The whispers continued. Gordon Cumming eventually sued for defamation, and the case went to court, dragging the entire scandal into the public eye. The Prince of Wales was called to testify, marking one of the rare times a royal appeared in court. It was frankly humiliating. The court ruled against Gordon Cumming, but public opinion was mixed. Many believed the prince had handled the situation poorly, protecting his reputation while sacrificing a man's honor. The scandal lingered for years and became a cautionary tale of aristocratic games gone wrong. It's a perfect example of how even the most trivial acts, a shuffled card, a bet placed, can snowball into reputational earthquakes when royalty is involved. And speaking of royal reputations, the next two women on our list had them, quite literally, elevated. Mary, Queen of Scots, and Mary II weren't just powerful, they were unusually tall. 34. Mary, Queen of Scots, and Mary II were exceptionally tall. When you picture historical monarchs, you probably don't imagine them towering over everyone in the room, especially not the women. But two of Britain's most iconic queens, Mary, Queen of Scots, and Mary II of England, reportedly broke that mold quite literally. According to various accounts, both stood at an impressive 5'11", making them strikingly tall for their time, and in Mary, Queen of Scots' case, towering above most men of the 16th century. To put that into perspective, the average height for a woman in the 1500s was around 5.2. A 5'11" woman would have been the equivalent of a modern NBA point guard walking into a Tudor banquet. Heads turned. Gossip followed. Mary, Queen of Scots, already known for her dramatic life story. Born a queen, married 3 times, imprisoned by her cousin Elizabeth I, and eventually executed, also made an impression simply by entering a room. Her height wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. Combined with her beauty, intellect, and controversial political decisions, she was often described as a commanding presence. Her statuesque figure added to the mythos, a woman born to rule in stature and spirit. Mary II, who ruled jointly with her husband William III after the Glorious Revolution, was also noted for her height. While less flamboyant than her Scottish namesake, Mary II's physical presence wasn't lost on contemporaries. In portraits, she's often painted with a regal bearing that subtly hints at her vertical advantage, not a trivial detail in an age where perception often carried more weight than reality. Height, for both women, became part of their legend. In an era when power was communicated through presence as much as policy, their stature was no small matter. Literally. And yet, towering over courtiers was nothing compared to the political traps they had to dodge. Or, in the case of one Scottish king, the assassination plot that literally unfolded behind a locked door, and a tragically placed tennis racket. 35. James I of Scotland died in a tennis racket plot. James I of Scotland had a pretty impressive resume, poet, reformer, king. But his reign ended in a tale of betrayal so bizarre, it reads like a dark comedy. In 1437, James was assassinated in a plot that, among other things, involved a blocked sewer drain, a terrified queen, and a missing tennis racket. Let's break it down. James had made enemies. His efforts to curb the power of the nobility didn't sit well with a group of disgruntled lords, including Sir Robert Graham, who organized a conspiracy against him. The plot unfolded at the Blackfriars Monastery in Perth, where James and his court were staying for the winter. Sensing danger, James tried to escape his attackers by fleeing into a sewer tunnel that had previously connected to the monastery. Unfortunately, and fatally, that passage had recently been sealed, by James himself, ironically, to stop tennis balls from getting lost during games. Yes, tennis balls. The king had ordered the drain sealed after losing one too many to the ancient plumbing system. And so, when it came time to escape a band of sword-wielding conspirators, the only exit was gone, blocked, bricked up, all to protect the royal tennis supply. Trapped and cornered, James was murdered in the basement while his queen, Joan Beaufort, fought desperately to save him, reportedly even injuring one of the attackers herself. She survived and went on to become a formidable political figure in her own right, but the king was lost. The story has lived on for centuries, partly because of its tragic absurdity. It's a perfect example of how royal security, even in the 15th century, could be undone by the most minor mundane decision. A tennis racket, a blocked tunnel, and a group of noblemen with vendettas were all it took to bring down a king. And if you think James's personal life ended badly, wait until you meet Alexander III of Scotland, whose romantic escapades managed to rattle even his most loyal advisors. 36. Alexander III of Scotland was a reckless lover. Alexander III of Scotland wasn't just a medieval king. He was a romantic headline waiting to happen. Crowned at the age of 8 in 1249, he ruled for decades with relative peace and prosperity. But after the death of his beloved wife, Margaret of England, in 1275, Alexander's private life took a turn toward the dramatic. Or, depending on how charitable you're feeling, the wildly reckless. Widowed and still relatively young, Alexander didn't retreat into quiet mourning. Instead, he plunged into a series of liaisons, affairs, and scandalous pursuits that gave the Scottish court a considerable amount of stress. Chronicles from the time, always a mix of fact, opinion, and dramatic flair, suggest the king became something of a playboy monarch, especially for the standards of the 13th century. It wasn't just the number of relationships that caused concern. It was the timing, the public nature, and the suspicion that his judgment was being clouded by desire more than diplomacy. His behavior was said to be dissolute, a polite medieval term that roughly translates to, "Someone please take away his royal signet until he calms down." In an effort to legitimize his personal life, and possibly secure another heir after the deaths of his children, Alexander married again, this time to Yolande of Dreux, a French noblewoman much younger than himself. The political implications were solid. The court breathed a temporary sigh of relief. But just months after the wedding, tragedy struck. In 1286, Alexander attempted to ride to see his new queen during a violent storm, against the advice of his council. His horse lost its footing on a cliff near Kinghorn, and he fell to his death. The nation was left without a clear successor, plunging Scotland into a succession crisis that ultimately paved the way for the Wars of Independence. Alexander's final years, marked by romance, impetuous decisions, and a fatal disregard for danger, remain a cautionary tale about the personal lives of kings, especially when those lives lead directly into power vacuums and political chaos. But for all the scandal and stormy nights, the next monarch on our list may be the most misunderstood of all. Shakespeare turned him into a monster, but the real Macbeth was something else entirely. 37. Macbeth, real, was less sinister than fiction. Say the name Macbeth, and most people immediately picture a guilt-ridden Scottish king, goaded into murder by witches and undone by hallucinations, blood-soaked ambition, and the occasional moving forest. Thanks, Shakespeare. But the real Macbeth? He was nothing like the fictional villain who ruined dinner parties and invented insomnia. Historically, Macbeth, or Macbeth ed Macfindlaig, was King of Scots from 1040 to 1057, and by medieval standards, he wasn't a tyrant. He was a competent ruler who came to power in a violent age, governed with relative stability, and even went on a pilgrimage to Rome, a luxury most bloodthirsty usurpers tend not to prioritize. Macbeth's rise to the throne wasn't through witchcraft or regicide of a benevolent old man named Duncan. The real King Duncan was likely a much younger and far less beloved figure, possibly even an ineffective ruler. Macbeth, by contrast, had a legitimate claim to the throne and gained support through political alliances and military strength. His reign was largely peaceful, and records suggest he was generous to the church and attentive to justice. He ruled for 17 years, a pretty good run for an 11th century king, and was eventually defeated by Malcolm III with the help of English support. That's right, Shakespeare's rightful heir had some outside help toppling the evil usurper. History, as usual, is more complicated than a 5-act tragedy. So why the villainy? Blame the bard. Shakespeare's Macbeth was written during the reign of James I, a Scottish king who traced his lineage to Banquo, a character Shakespeare goes out of his way to portray as noble and wronged. The play isn't history, it's political fan fiction, designed to flatter a monarch. The result? A real king got turned into a bloodthirsty madman in the popular imagination. Macbeth's legacy, rewritten for entertainment, reminds us that sometimes the most enduring myths are the least accurate. And speaking of strange bedtime practices, our next mystery loops back to the medieval bedroom. Because apparently, Macbeth wasn't the only one sharing his sleep space with something unusual. In the royal world, even the beds had relics. 38. Royal relics used in bed. In medieval times, beds were more than just furniture. For royalty, they were spiritual fortresses. Places to sleep, yes, but also places to ward off evil, attract blessings, and channel divine protection. And what better way to do that than by literally sleeping with relics? Royal relics were pieces of sacred history, bone fragments of saints, cloth touched by holy figures, slivers of the true cross, and other devotional items. Kings and queens kept these relics close, often placing them in or around their beds. Some were tucked under pillows, sewn into mattress linings, or kept in ornate cases beside the bed like nightstand guardians. Why? Because spiritual protection wasn't something monarchs took lightly. Illness, assassination, and general misfortune lurked in every corner of court life. In an age where medicine was mostly superstition with a bandage on it, divine intervention was a legitimate form of risk management. But these weren't purely sentimental acts. To possess a relic was a sign of divine favor. It connected the monarch with the church, reinforced the idea of God-given authority, and provided a public signal that they ruled not just by law, but by sacred right. This practice wasn't limited to British monarchs. Across Europe, royalty collected and displayed relics like divine trophies. But in Britain, where politics and religion often clashed with theatrical drama, the act of sleeping beside a holy femur or saintly rib bone had added weight. It wasn't about comfort, it was about continuity. To sleep under the gaze of a saint was to reinforce your place in the great chain of divine monarchy. Every breath you took under those blankets was part prayer, part propaganda. And while relics are no longer part of royal bedtime rituals, one thing that hasn't changed is scandal, especially when it comes to certain medieval monarchs and their questionable bedroom behavior, and King John had plenty of that to go around. 39. King John's bedroom. Habits. Scandalous. King John, who ruled from 1199 to 1216, is best remembered for losing half of France, signing and then promptly ignoring the Magna Carta, and being cast as the classic villain in every Robin Hood retelling. But beyond his political failures and legal tantrums, John also carried a reputation for, let's say, overstepping in his personal life. By medieval accounts, John's behavior in the royal bedroom, and beyond it, was less than noble. Chroniclers describe him as predatory in his pursuit of women, abusing his power to coerce and humiliate. He was rumored to have kept a harem of women within the royal household and was said to take noblewomen against their will or punish their families if they resisted. While historians debate the accuracy of some accounts, the common thread is clear. John was not exactly a paragon of courtly virtue. Even his marriages were fraught with drama. He famously divorced his first wife, Isabel of Gloucester, without cause, then married the much younger Isabella of Angoulême, who was already betrothed to another nobleman. This led not just to scandal, but to political fallout that helped spark rebellion in his French territories. When John wasn't making poor decisions in court, he was making them in private chambers, and somehow both sets of choices always seemed to end in revolt. His enemies, and there were many, painted him as a lecherous, power-drunk monarch, often more interested in revenge and pleasure than governance. Even contemporary clergymen criticized him from the pulpit, an unusual level of public condemnation for a sitting king. One chronicler famously wrote that, "Hell itself is defiled by the foulness of John, which, even by medieval standards, is impressively unsubtle." The monarchy tried, unsuccessfully, to clean up his reputation after his death, but it stuck. Today, John's name is synonymous with tyranny, failure, and a kind of medieval moral rot. And if the details of his personal habits make you wince, you're not alone. But don't worry, our next fact isn't nearly as scandalous. It's just dental. Because Elizabeth Verse, she had a sugar problem, and her teeth paid the price. 40. Elizabeth Verse sweet tooth wrecked her teeth. Elizabeth Thoy ruled with steely resolve, unmatched intellect, and a razor-sharp tongue. But her actual teeth? Not quite so resilient. Like many of her Tudor contemporaries, Elizabeth had a notorious sweet tooth. Sugar was a novelty in 16th century England, rare, expensive, and a symbol of wealth. Naturally, the Queen of England indulged. Candied violets, sugar-dusted fruits, sweetmeats, marzipan, and even heavily sweetened wines reportedly featured in her royal diet. The more sugar, the more status. And as the most powerful woman in England, her appetite for status, and sweets, was second to none. Unfortunately, dental hygiene was still in the experimental phase. Think ground-up charcoal, vinegar rinses, and the occasional cloth scrub. And sugar, as we now know, is a dental assassin. The result? Elizabeth's teeth turned black. Not metaphorically, literally. Blackened teeth were common among the upper classes, and in a strange twist of social logic, the look eventually became fashionable. A strange flex that said, "I'm rich enough to ruin my teeth." Foreign ambassadors commented on her decaying teeth in dispatches home. Some even reported that her speech became harder to understand in later years. But Elizabeth, famously private and controlling of her image, was loath to admit any weakness. She covered her bad teeth with layers of makeup and strategic positioning, much like she did with her thinning hair and pockmarked skin. In the end, Elizabeth's diet, indulgent, lavish, and completely in step with the status expectations of her time, became part of her myth. Not just a queen who ruled with an iron fist, but one who cloaked decay in power, transforming personal flaws into royal image. And speaking of firsts and flourishes, Elizabeth's dental decline was far from the only royal milestone. Across the centuries, the British monarchy has racked up plenty of firsts, but some are more unexpected than others. Like which queen was the first to call Buckingham Palace home? 41. Royal women and their firsts. The history of the British monarchy is littered with kings who took, conquered, declared, or destroyed. But the queens? They often started things, quietly, persistently, and with more legacy than most battles ever managed. Take Queen Victoria, for instance, the first monarch to live in Buckingham Palace as her primary residence. Before her, the palace existed in various forms: a townhouse, a retreat, a slightly grander version of a very expensive Airbnb. But it was Victoria who made it the symbolic heart of the British monarchy. In 1837, just 3 weeks after ascending the throne, she moved in and never looked back. It wasn't just a change of address. By making Buckingham Palace her official residence, Victoria transformed it into the beating, gilded heart of royal Britain. She held state functions there, raised her children there, and quite literally birthed a new era of monarchy within its walls. The Victorian age began with a queen in a palace, not a king on a battlefield. But she wasn't the only royal woman to achieve a significant first. Queen Mary I was the first woman to rule England in her own right, not as a regent or consort. Elizabeth I was the first monarch to skillfully wield image-making and personal branding long before Instagram and soft lighting. Queen Anne oversaw the unification of England and Scotland into Great Britain in 1707. Royal women, often underestimated, have been architects of transformation. They may not always have ruled with swords, but they reshaped institutions, palaces, and expectations. These firsts may not always come with fanfare, but they stick. And they remind us that monarchy isn't just made by the men in armor, but also by the women who redecorated the palaces, restructured the state, and occasionally revolutionized dinner menus. Speaking of menus, the royal family's dining rules don't end at frog pie and sweetmeats. They also come with a list of foods to avoid, especially when traveling. One bad oyster, after all, could become an international incident. 42. Strange food restrictions. Travel-wise. If you've ever been warned not to eat the street food while traveling abroad, you're not alone. The British royal family follows that advice religiously. Only in their case, it's not so much a travel tip as a standing policy enforced with centuries of quiet paranoia and palace memos. When royals travel on official duty, certain foods are strictly off-limits. Chief among them, shellfish, rare meat, and unfiltered water. The reason? Food poisoning. Nothing derails a state visit quite like a royal stomach bug. Imagine the Queen missing a diplomatic banquet because of a bad prawn. Unacceptable. Also probably front-page news. Shellfish in particular is frowned upon. Oysters, mussels, clams, too risky. The family is advised to avoid them while on tours or official functions, though it's not a hard ban. Some modern royals, like Prince Charles, have reportedly bent the rule on occasion. But the overarching idea remains: keep it safe, keep it simple, and keep it dignified. This cautious dining extends to airplane food as well. When traveling, the royal entourage often brings its own chefs or pre-approved meal plans. Even water is carefully sourced. The logic? No surprises. Monarchs aren't supposed to suffer from foodborne mysteries mid-speech. These rules don't apply when they're off-duty, just like the garlic ban we covered earlier. In private, the royal palate is reportedly quite adventurous. But in public, it's chicken, fish, or something beige. The idea behind it all is simple. The monarchy, for all its ceremonial grandeur, is still a walking, waving, ribbon-cutting symbol of national identity. And symbols aren't supposed to get indigestion. Of course, one royal symbol that's evolved over time is their very name. Because while they technically have a surname, Mountbatten Windsor, many royals have used a different one altogether depending on where their title takes them. 43. Royal family had changing surnames by title. The British royal family is many things: ceremonially consistent, maddeningly mysterious, and often baffling when it comes to paperwork. But perhaps the most head-scratching of all is this: they don't really have one fixed surname. They just borrow one when needed. And even that can change depending on title, rank, or which military uniform they're wearing that day. Officially, the family surname is Mountbatten Windsor, a hyphenated blend born out of compromise. Windsor was adopted in 1917 by King George V to sound less German during World War I. Mountbatten came later, courtesy of Prince Philip, who anglicized his Greek-Danish surname when he married then Princess Elizabeth. But most royals never actually use this name in day-to-day life. Instead, they take surnames based on their titles. Prince William and Prince Harry, for example, went by William Wales and Harry Wales while in school and the military because their father was Prince of Wales at the time. Now, William's children go by George Wales, Charlotte Wales, and Louis Wales, since he inherited the title. Before that, Charles went by Charles Mountbatten Windsor on legal documents, but publicly, he was just Prince Charles. And now, as king, he doesn't need a last name at all. He's not Charles Windsor. He's simply His Majesty the King. Try fitting that on a tax form. This floating surname practice isn't just a quirk. It's a calculated aspect of royal identity. Royals are supposed to be above ordinary things like surnames. Their titles first, individuals second. Using Mountbatten Windsor in public would be like the Pope introducing himself as Mr. Vatican. Of course, in moments that require legal clarity, weddings, lawsuits, official records, the full surname is brought out, dusted off, and quietly inserted where necessary. It's all part of the mystique. Royalty doesn't just have names. They wield them. And while the royals may not always agree on surnames, there is one thing they've all had to deal with: the truly strange animals given to them as gifts. From tortoises to elephants, the royal petting zoo has gotten unexpectedly exotic. 44. Animals gifted to royals. Sometimes while diplomatic gifts are often delicate things, a token of goodwill, a symbol of mutual respect, maybe a painting, maybe a jeweled trinket, maybe a live elephant. Yes, really. Throughout history, the British royal family has received a wildly eclectic menagerie of animals as official state gifts, many of them far too exotic and far too alive to keep in a palace courtyard. Among the oddest offerings, a pair of live tortoises, a crocodile, a jaguar, sloths, and yes, an elephant. Because nothing says long-standing alliance quite like a several-ton mammal. Most of these gifts came from countries hoping to impress or solidify diplomatic ties. In the Age of Empire, exotic animals symbolized power, prestige, and far-flung control. The royal menagerie, which once operated out of the Tower of London, was the original recipient of these beasts. Over time, the collection was moved to what would become the London Zoo. In the modern era, these animal offerings continue, though the practice is now mostly ceremonial. The animals are promptly handed over to zoos or wildlife organizations, ensuring they're properly cared for, and not wandering loose in the halls of Windsor Castle. Still, the sheer variety is worth pausing over. In 1961, during a visit to Cameroon, Queen Elizabeth was presented with an elephant. Other state gifts included a baby crocodile from the Gambia and a kangaroo from Australia. Princess Anne once received a bull. No word on whether she rode it. The royal family never keeps these animals personally, but the message behind the gesture is clear. We admire you, and here's something that can bite. It's an old tradition dressed in modern clothing. While the animals now end up in carefully monitored enclosures, the symbolism remains unchanged. Monarchy is spectacle, diplomacy is pageantry. And occasionally, when diplomacy wasn't enough, the Queen herself stepped in with something simple, a handwritten letter, even if the recipient happened to be 116 years old. 45. Queen Elizabeth wrote to a 116-year-old Canadian. Among the thousands of letters Queen Elizabeth II sent during her 70-year reign, one stood out for its recipient's remarkable longevity. In 1984, she penned a personal note to Charles "Charlie" Brem, a Canadian man who had just turned 116 years old. That made him the oldest man in the country at the time, and more importantly, someone very much on the Queen's royal radar. Her letter wasn't flashy. It was dignified, courteous, and exactly what you'd expect from the British monarch. A formal expression of congratulations for a milestone few human beings ever reach. But behind the official tone, there was something oddly touching about the gesture. A monarch, herself no stranger to the passage of time, reaching out across continents to acknowledge someone who had lived through nearly twice as many years as most of her subjects. Charlie Brem had been born in 1868, a full 11 years before Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. By the time he received the Queen's letter, he had lived through 2 world wars, the invention of the automobile, the moon landing, and the entirety of Elizabeth's reign up to that point. The Queen's words were, quite literally, coming from someone who hadn't been born when he was already middle-aged. This wasn't a one-off. The Queen was known for sending personal notes to centenarians and other record holders. Every British citizen who turned 100 got a congratulatory card, a tradition she kept even as the list grew longer every year. Her note to Charlie was a Canadian extension of that tradition, made all the more poignant by the fact that he had witnessed more history than most textbooks contain. The letter, simple as it was, became a symbol of the monarchy's enduring, and often surprisingly personal, connection to everyday lives, a tiny moment where royalty met reality. And if you think that's the most unexpected part of royal heritage, just wait until you explore where the monarchy actually comes from. And spoiler alert, it's not entirely British. In fact, there's a whole lot of German in the royal DNA. 46. The royal family's German, continental roots. You'd be forgiven for assuming the British royal family has always been, well, British. But peel back the layers of ceremonial Englishness, the scones, the kilts, the stiff upper lips, and what you'll find is a surprisingly continental DNA strand stretching deep into German, Danish, and Greek bloodlines. In fact, for most of the last few centuries, the royal family has been more European than British. The current House of Windsor only dates back to 1917. Before that, they were the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, a distinctly German dynasty brought into the British line through Queen Victoria's marriage to Prince Albert, himself a German prince. Victoria and Albert had 9 children, who then married into various royal families across Europe. This made Queen Victoria the grandmother of Europe, a nickname that was both sweet and slightly ominous by the time World War I rolled around. The King of England, the Kaiser of Germany, and the Tsar of Russia were all first cousins, which made international conflict awkward, to say the least. During WWE, anti-German sentiment was rampant in Britain, and having a royal house with a German name wasn't great for morale. So, in a strategic rebrand that would have made any modern PR agency weep with pride, King George V changed the family name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor. A good, solid, English-sounding name pulled from Windsor Castle. Problem solved. Sort of. But the German roots didn't vanish. Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth II's husband, was born a prince of Greece and Denmark, with deep ties to the German aristocracy. His original surname? Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg, Glucksburg. No, it doesn't fit on a mug. Even today, the family tree remains an elaborate braid of European houses. Danish, Greek, German, it's all in there. British they may be, but their bloodline is a continental tour. And if you're wondering whether that history ever got too close to home, consider the rumors of a man secretly living under Buckingham Palace. Not a metaphor, an actual man, in the tunnels. 47. A man living in the tunnels under Buckingham. Imagine being so thoroughly forgotten by society that you end up living under Buckingham Palace, not metaphorically, not as a critique of class divisions, but literally, in the tunnels. Sounds like a plot from a Victorian Gothic novel or a conspiracy-fueled podcast, but it's an actual royal rumor with just enough plausibility to make you raise an eyebrow. The story dates back to the reign of King George VI, father of Queen Elizabeth II. According to palace lore, and we're in the foggy territory between confirmed fact and aristocratic urban legend, a man was found living in the disused tunnels beneath Buckingham Palace. The details are murky. No one knows how long he'd been there, who he was, or how exactly he got in. Some say he was a vagrant who found his way in through old sewer access. Others claim he was a former staff member who never left. What's not disputed is that the palace does, in fact, have tunnels. Some are confirmed escape routes built during wartime. Others connect to nearby buildings like Clarence House or the old palace kitchens. Their exact layout remains a royal secret, for security reasons, of course. But enough reports have surfaced over the years to confirm their existence. The discovery of the tunnel dweller reportedly shocked the palace staff, not because of danger, but because it shattered the illusion of impermeability. The royal residence, with all its guards and gates and centuries of tradition, had been breached not by terrorists or protesters, but by a forgotten man with nowhere else to go. Whether this story is entirely true or embellished over decades of retelling, it lingers, because nothing quite captures the contradiction of monarchy like the idea of a king in his palace, unaware of a man quietly surviving beneath his feet. Of course, not everything under the palace was quite so haunting. Some things, like electric lights, were actually ahead of their time. 48. Buckingham's ballroom was first electrified room. If you've ever wondered where the future started inside Buckingham Palace, it wasn't in the throne room, or the royal kitchens, or even the Queen's private study. It was the ballroom. In 1883, the palace ballroom became the first room to be fully electrified, a flick of the switch that marked the monarchy's cautious entry into the modern age. It wasn't just symbolic, it was functional. The ballroom, used for grand receptions, banquets, and state events, needed to impress. And nothing said modern monarchy like light bulbs instead of candle wax. Electricity was still a novelty in Britain at the time. Most homes were lit by gas or oil, and electric lighting was both expensive and experimental. Installing it in a royal residence was a bold move, one that had to be carefully managed to avoid literal shock. Engineers from the Edison Electric Light Company helped implement the new system, and it was Queen Victoria herself who approved the project. The ballroom was chosen not only for its grandeur, but also because it was the most frequently used large space for public-facing events. The message was subtle but clear. The monarchy may be ancient, but it wasn't stuck in the past. Progress was happening, even if it was being tested behind gilded doors. Over time, electricity spread throughout the palace. By the turn of the century, more rooms were wired, and eventually the palace joined the rest of London in its fully lit skyline. But there's something beautifully ironic about the first flicker of light in the monarchy happening in a room built for dancing, pomp, and royal performance. It was, in every way, the most appropriate stage for progress. And speaking of grand performances, the next event in royal history took place on a very unexpected date, Christmas Day, 1066, and involved a crown, a coronation, and the dawn of a whole new royal era. 49. First coronation on Christmas Day. Most people spend Christmas surrounded by family, wrapped in questionable knitwear, perhaps indulging in a regrettable quantity of mince pies. William the Conqueror, however, spent his Christmas Day in 1066 being crowned King of England, inside Westminster Abbey no less, setting the tone for the next 1,000 years of British royal drama. The date wasn't chosen at random. William had just defeated King Harold II at the Battle of Hastings in October and was eager to consolidate his claim to the throne. But crowning a Norman duke in a recently conquered Saxon kingdom? Tricky business. Optics mattered. So, the decision to hold the coronation on December 25th was both deeply symbolic and exquisitely calculated. Christmas was already one of the holiest days in the Christian calendar, marking the birth of Christ and the promise of renewal. By anchoring his coronation to that date, William wasn't just claiming a crown. He was linking his reign to divine providence, God's will, manifest on earth, with a fur-lined robe. The ceremony itself was grand, if chaotic. As legend has it, when the assembled nobles and clergy shouted their acclamations in multiple languages, Norman French and Old English, the soldiers outside, hearing the sudden uproar, thought a riot had broken out. In true medieval fashion, they responded by setting fire to nearby buildings. So yes, William was crowned King of England, while smoke drifted through the stained glass of Westminster Abbey, and a crowd outside looted the neighborhood. If that doesn't summarize British history in a single scene, what does? But behind the chaos was a clear message. There was a new king in town, and he came not just with armies, but with ritual, spectacle, and a willingness to set tradition, and maybe a few buildings, ablaze. This moment marked more than just a power grab. It was the foundation of the monarchy as an institution that intertwines church, state, and theater. Coronations have been held at Westminster Abbey ever since. The date may have changed, but the weight of that first Christmas coronation still lingers in the DNA of British pageantry. And from the origin of kingship, we fast forward nearly a millennium to another royal first, one far more domestic but equally meaningful, the birth of a child while reigning. 50. Royal births. While reigning. For most of royal history, reigning monarchs didn't have babies, largely because they were men. Queens regnant, those who ruled in their own right, were rare, and when they did exist, their pregnancies often became matters of state secrecy or public hysteria. So when Queen Elizabeth II gave birth to Prince Andrew in 1960, it was something of a modern novelty, a sitting monarch having a child while actively ruling. Elizabeth had already had 2 children, Charles and Anne, before she ascended the throne in 1952. But the birth of Andrew marked the first time in centuries that a reigning British monarch gave birth during her tenure. In fact, the last one before her was Queen Victoria, who gave birth multiple times while reigning, though with significantly more public discomfort about the entire process. By 1960, Britain had entered a new era. The monarchy was being televised, photographed, and scrutinized in ways unimaginable in earlier centuries. And yet, Elizabeth's pregnancy and delivery were handled with remarkable discretion. There was no public bump watch, no endless press speculation, just an announcement, a few formal bulletins, and eventually a baby. Andrew's birth, followed by that of Prince Edward in 1964, subtly humanized the Queen in the eyes of the public. She wasn't just a distant figure waving from balconies, she was a working mother, navigating state duties and family life. It added a layer of relatability, albeit a royal version with nannies, palaces, and security detail. This return to monarch as mother also softened the image of the crown during a time of shifting societal norms. The 1960s were turbulent. Tradition was being questioned. The monarchy needed to seem both enduring and adaptable. Elizabeth's visible role as a mother, balanced with her unwavering presence as head of state, offered just that. And while babies in palaces are nothing new, the way they were introduced to the public changed significantly in the late 20th century. What didn't change, however, was the peculiar legal structure around monarchic succession, especially the detail that kingship begins instantly upon death of the predecessor. No waiting, no ceremony required. 51. Monarch succession. Sometimes silent. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away in 2022, Charles became king in that exact moment. Not after the funeral, not after the coronation, but immediately. It's one of the stranger truths about monarchy. There is no gap, no vacuum, no in-between. The crown is never unoccupied, not even for a second. This ancient principle is summed up in the Latin phrase rex nunquam moritur. The king never dies. It's less of a poetic gesture and more of a constitutional necessity. The second one monarch draws their last breath, the heir becomes the new sovereign, legally, politically, spiritually. A human may die, but the institution carries on, unbroken. Charles didn't need to sign anything. He didn't need to sit on a throne or don a crown. His accession was automatic. The Accession Council met later to make it official in ceremonial terms, but in reality, the moment Queen Elizabeth died, Charles III became king, even if he was still digesting the news over a cup of tea. This strange legal tidiness is part of what gives the monarchy its illusion of permanence. In a world where power usually transitions through elections, negotiations, or coups, the British throne shifts silently, like a baton passed mid-sentence. You don't hear the handoff, you just notice the voice has changed. It also underscores the weird duality of the role. Charles went to bed one night as Prince of Wales. He woke up, still grieving, perhaps still in shock, as sovereign of an entire kingdom. There is no grace period. There is no training montage. The crown is yours whether you're ready or not. The public rituals, coronations, proclamations, national mourning, are just that. Rituals. Important, symbolic, emotionally resonant. But by law and tradition, they're not necessary for kingship to begin. The throne is never vacant. It waits for no one. Which makes it all the more surreal when you consider how far-reaching the monarchy's symbolic power has become, even apparently into outer space. Because yes, the next item on our royal list involves Newton, an apple tree, and orbit. 52. Royal DNA in space. Sort of. The British royal family has always had a curious relationship with symbolism. They don't just shake hands and cut ribbons. They turn ordinary acts into rituals and everyday items into national icons. So perhaps it was inevitable that even outer space, that final frontier, would one day be roped into the pageantry of the crown. Enter the apple tree. Not just any apple tree, but the apple tree. The one in Isaac Newton's garden at Woolsthorpe Manor, Lincolnshire, where the story goes he first contemplated gravity after witnessing an apple fall. Whether or not it hit him on the head is irrelevant. The myth stuck. And with it, the tree became a kind of secular relic of British genius. Fast forward to 2015, and British astronaut Major Tim Peake took a piece of that very tree, or more precisely some of its seeds, aboard the International Space Station. The mission? Symbolic, of course, to unite Britain's scientific heritage with its modern space ambitions. It was a gesture that quietly echoed with royal undertones. After all, Newton was once knighted by Queen Anne. He served as warden of the Royal Mint. He was part of that peculiar club of brilliant men folded neatly into the imperial structure of monarchy and state. The seed from his tree going to space wasn't just science, it was legacy. And in Britain, legacy inevitably circles back to the crown. When Peake returned, the seeds were planted, and the trees grown from them were ceremonially presented to various institutions, including those linked with the royal family. The Queen herself acknowledged the achievement. It wasn't official royal DNA going to space, but it was close, symbolically tethered to the history of the monarchy, science, and British identity. This merging of monarchy and modernity has always been part of the royal toolkit. They don't just preserve tradition, they rebrand it, launch it into orbit, then smile modestly as it returns to Earth with a commemorative plaque. And speaking of symbols returning to Earth, the monarchy also keeps careful tabs on everything it receives from the world, including gifts. All of them, even the weird ones, because nothing escapes the royal gift ledger. 53. The royal household logs, gifts, even bizarre ones. Picture this. You're a tribal chief, a foreign diplomat, or maybe just an ambitious zoo director. You're meeting the British monarch, and protocol dictates you must bring a gift. What do you choose? A sword? A rare jewel? A basket of mangoes? A sloth? Yes. All of the above have been gifted to the royal family, and every single item, from priceless artifacts to utterly baffling oddities, gets logged in an official registry maintained by the royal household. It's less a gift list and more of an annual time capsule of diplomatic imagination. The practice is meticulous. Each year, the palace releases a summary of all official gifts received by royal family members. These include everything from ceremonial daggers to framed photos, from woven blankets to endangered animals. Nothing is too humble or too strange. The gift registry is a weird, wonderful look at the things people think say, "We honor you," in tangible form. Some highlights over the years include a giant totem pole, a custom surfboard, an entire herd of cattle, a samurai sword, multiple jars of locally harvested honey, a cowboy hat, and yes, multiple live animals, including tortoises, kangaroos, and aforementioned sloths. The rules are strict. Royals can't personally accept lavish gifts, especially those of high monetary value, unless they're symbolic, used for official duties, or deemed in the national interest. If a gift exceeds a certain value, it doesn't go into the royal personal collection. It goes to the crown, or in some cases, to a museum, or to the Tower of London, where historical oddities go to live out their days under armed guard. This rigorous documentation serves several purposes. It ensures transparency. It prevents corruption. It keeps the public aware that just because a queen receives a diamond-encrusted tiara from a foreign dignitary doesn't mean she gets to wear it to dinner. It also reveals something else. The monarchy is constantly being interpreted by the outside world. Every object, no matter how absurd, is someone's attempt to communicate, to flatter, to forge connection, or to make a statement. And that's where our collection of 53 strange royal facts ends, in a storeroom full of forgotten artifacts, unexpected tributes, and carefully tagged absurdities. It's all a bit ridiculous, and very royal. The monarchy may be about crowns, thrones, and ancient rituals, but it's also about teddy bears, bagpipes, banned board games, and garlic bands. It's an empire built not just on history, but on eccentricity. Because if there's one unspoken rule of royalty, it's this: you don't just reign, you perform.